Okay. Hello, my name is Natalie McHugh and I'm from the HIT Lab, the Human Interface Technology Lab at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch. So today I'm talking to you about my short paper titled Investigating a Physical Dial as a Measurement Tool for Cybersickness in Virtual Reality. I worked on this with my colleagues Sungchul, Rob and Simon. So this work began when I first tried on an HMD and was excited and captivated by the immersed scene that I was in. This shortly led to a wave of a peculiar sensation of nausea and disorientation. I'm sure lots of you have experienced this in some form, especially when using an HMD in VR. I was experiencing cybersickness, also known as VIMS, visually induced motion sickness. So cybersickness is an ailment that is related to classical motion sickness that some people experience in cars or boats. It is also closely related to simulator sickness, which people experience when in simulators. However, cybersickness has a slightly different symptoms profile. So cybersickness has a wide array of symptoms which predominantly affect the head, eyes and stomach. These include eye strain, disorientation, headaches, nausea, gastric disturbances and sweating. So challenges of measuring cybersickness include the large amount of individual variation in the symptoms experienced by users. So for example, one participant may become really sweaty when they're cybersick, whereas another one may only have eye strain. Secondly, most users who experience cybersickness see a reduction in symptoms as they have repeated exposures or they habituate to the technology. However, a small percentage, an unlucky percentage of the population, don't habituate to VR. They actually become hypersensitive to VR and even more cybersick. Thirdly, cybersickness has a subjective component to it. So evidence of this can be seen in the paper by Jung in 2007, whereby post-immersion questionnaire scores were inflated in those participants who took pre-immersion questionnaires. So being exposed to a questionnaire about the sickness may cause participants to perform to demand characteristics and experience a higher reported levels of cybersickness when they take it after the immersion. So another point on the subjective component of cybersickness is that each participant may have a subjective threshold that they are willing to experience to continue their VR experience. So for example, I get car sick and have managed feelings of nausea and may be willing to manage a higher level of cybersickness in VR than someone who comes from a different background. So you can think of this subjective component comparable to the subjective nature of pain. So the goals of this research were centered around increasing comfort in virtual reality. So we aim to achieve this by minimizing cybersickness in virtual reality. The first step towards achieving this will be through understanding the relationship between the characteristics of VR and in causing cybersickness. So understanding these relationships will be enhanced by having an adequate measurement tool to actually capture these cybersickness levels. So in order to gain the most insight on these relationships, this tool should firstly collect temporally accurate or real-time data while not disrupting the user's experience or breaking precedents. So, as you all know, in the research, measuring physiological factors, behaviours and questionnaires are all strategies that have been employed to capture cybersickness levels. So questionnaires tap into consciously experienced levels of cybersickness, usually directly after the VR immersion has taken place. Also, the most widely used questionnaire, which I'm sure you have all used, is the Simulator Sickness Questionnaire, which was actually developed by extracting relevant factors from the Pensacola Motion Sickness Questionnaire by Kennedy and colleagues in 1993 using the simulator technology available then. It's also interesting to note that the SSQ was developed for military personnel, specifically helicopter pilots. It is great to see the work modifying the SSQ to make it more suited to the virtual reality technology. So the VRST by Kim in 2018 and the CSQ by Stone in 2017 are post-immersion questionnaires developed for VR environment from conducting factorial analyses of the SSQ. So Stone actually found that one total cybersickness rating did not match the data set, but instead found that two scores, so difficulty focusing and disorientation, actually matched the data set better. So in both these methods, you can actually give the SSQ and then rescore it for a more appropriate VR cybersickness rating. Another technique is the fast motion sickness scale called the FMS, which is a verbal technique that collects ratings during the immersion. So participants are asked by the experimenter to give their sickness a numerical rating between 0 to 20 every 60 seconds. So the FMS was developed and also validated by Kyburz and Hecht using a projector projecting onto a screen of a pre-recorded video of a car doing laps around a racetrack. So this is kind of different to VR, but they do state that the FMS is suitable for measuring cybersickness in VR, and it has been used in some VR studies. So the premise for our experiment was to investigate a physical dial as a measurement tool for capturing levels of cybersickness in VR. So why did we choose a dial? We hypothesized that the simple action of turning up or down the dial, like you turn up or down volume, would map well onto the experienced cybersickness symptoms. This was informed by Norman, 1986, and Sutcliffe and Core in 2000. And another additional premise for the experiment was that we wanted to investigate the appropriateness of the verbal FMS in a VR context. So we had a really simple study design. It was between subject with two conditions, so we had 18 participants in each condition, the physical dial condition and the verbal FMS condition. So our participants, we had 36 participants with a mean age of 26.1 years, and the standard deviation was 7.18 years. We had 16 males and 20 females. So we hypothesized that those participants using the dial would be more highly correlated with the post-immersion SSQ scores and the CSQ scores than the verbal FMS rating. Secondly, we also hypothesized that those using the dial would have a deeper sense of presence than those in the verbal FMS. So we used the HTC Vive head-mounted display and the Alienware laptop. A four-legged padded chair with armrests. We wanted to use this chair because it was quite stable, and we didn't want those who weren't in the dial condition to be unfairly affected with not having the additional stability. Headphones as well. So those in the physical dial condition used the Microsoft Surface dial and had a corresponding graphical user interface using the rating number. So you can see that from the picture above here. So those in the verbal FMS condition did not have this numerical rating, and that was a choice that we made because we wanted to replicate the FMS as closely as the previous authors. So the measurements of our study were that all participants would receive a visual prompt every 60 seconds. They would then give a rating between 0 to 20 by either turning the dial or verbally telling the experimenter a number. So then after the immersion, participants completed the SSQ questionnaire and the presence questionnaire. So this is the procedure of our study. So participants completed health and safety and signed a consent form. And then when describing cybersickness, we wanted to be really careful with how we described it, that we didn't introduce priming or bias in the description. So we asked participants to focus on their head, eyes and stomach for symptoms. And of course you also have to explain the scale, because people are like, well, what's a 15? What's a 20? So we explained it to them as 0 being no cybersickness and 20 being the point, equivalent to if you were in a car and you'd have to like tell the driver you've got to pull over right now. So then after that, participants completed a demographic questionnaire, and then participants were in a passive roller coaster experience for 5 minutes and 50 seconds. We initially wanted to do more like 10 minutes, but after the pilot study, we got feedback that it was way too cybersick inducing, so we reduced it. Participants then completed the post-immersion questionnaires. So all 36 participants were able to complete the experiment, and from this we collected some really interesting results. The first graph shown is the time course of the cybersickness scores measured for the two groups, so the physical dial and the verbal FMS. Unsurprisingly, in both the measuring conditions, cybersickness ratings increased as the duration of the VR immersion increased, and they both follow a pretty similar pattern. So we conducted median splits on both the dial and the FMS datasets. So in the graph we can see the time course showing the median splits groups for both measurement conditions. So what's most interesting here is those in the highest susceptibility scores of the dial. They showed a continued increase in ratings after 3 minutes of immersion. So that's the top green one. Whereas those in the FMS, the orange, they did not show this increase. So the peak cybersickness scores in both the physical dial and the verbal FMS were analysed against the post-immersion SSQ, and then we rescored the SSQ for CSQ scores. So as we can see in the table, Pearson's R and corresponding p-values were calculated. All post-immersion scores were highly correlated with the physical dial. The physical dial peak rating with p-values of 0.01. This is apart from the CSQ difficulty focusing group. So then in the FMS, only the SSQ total scores and the SSQ nausea subscale scores were correlated with the peak verbal FMS rating. So these two scatter plots show the post-immersion SSQ total score and the peak cybersickness measurement score. So on the left is the physical dial and on the right is the verbal FMS. So if you look at these scatter plots and compare them, what's interesting to note is that there is an increased spread of scores given by participants in the dial condition when compared to the verbal FMS condition. So now on to discussion. So compared to the original study of the verbal FMS by Kyburz and Hecht in 2011, our correlation, our R values, decreased in the virtual reality environment from 0.785 down to 0.569. So we postulate that this could be due to the change in display type. So from a projector projected onto a screen to an HMD, we think that the increased immersion into the VR in the HMD may have made verbally communicating into the real world kind of awkward and less effective. So maybe the FMS is less appropriate when wearing HMD. We found higher correlations with all the physical dial condition and all questionnaire scores. So there was also no impact in present scores between the two measuring types. So from this, it suggests that the dial could be used to allow measurement of cybersickness and to be standardized and allow new VR content to be measured and contextualized within previous content. This could be used directly by users wanting to increase comfort in VR by using low-rated cybersickness content, or used directly by researchers to help determine factors causing cybersickness. So limitations. Firstly, the SSQ as a baseline measurement of cybersickness. So as previously mentioned, the SSQ was developed for a specific subgroup of the population using simulated technology 20 years ago, which is different from the academic setting and the VR technology it was applied to in this study. However, we did see an opportunity to use a more appropriate method and also included the CSQ. So a second limitation was the possible bias introduced by the demand characteristics. So when you think about it, participants experienced a visual prompt that came up every minute saying, please give your sickness a rating. And participants may have performed to the demand characteristic of continuity when giving their cybersickness ratings of the dial or verbal, and then with the post-SSQ questionnaire. So also multiple exposures to the word sickness may have had priming effects and manipulated the experienced levels of cybersickness. Our last limitation was a limited amount of statistical analysis that could be done between the differences between the two measuring techniques. This was partly due to the limited significance of the correlations with the verbal FMS and the post-SSQ, but also we did have a smaller number of participants than the initial FMS study, so we had 36 compared to 126. So just to conclude, the physical dial measurement of cybersickness significantly correlates positively with post-immersion SSQ and the CSQ dizziness scores. So the physical dial had more significant correlations with post-immersion questionnaire scores than the verbal FMS. However, there was no effect on measurement type on present scores. So we see lots of opportunities to further refine and validate the physical dial as a measurement tool. We're interested in what effect the removing of the user interface would have on dial ratings. I'd also like to explore how removing the 0 to 20 scale and having an anchorless measurement, so no endpoints on the dial. The experiment tested the dial in a passive seated roller coaster immersion, and we're interested in the impact of using different VR content with different amounts of vection, standing conditions, and more active VR. So lastly, we can envisage a smaller dial that is worn on the user's person in an accessible position to allow unrestricted exploration and minimal disruption in the VR. So thank you for listening, and yeah, I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
Hi, interesting work. We just had a chat with Michael from Japan. He was saying that, oh, it's so difficult to get ethics clearance for these kind of studies in Japan where you're getting people sick.
Yeah.
Well, in your study, you had 36 people and none of them quit.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though they ranked their sickness something like 7 out of 10, which is really high.
Out of 20.
Out of 20, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
So how did you manage to do that? So
We're-
why none of them just took off the headset and just said, I had enough? Because I was thinking what would happen.
I think because it was so short, like 5 minutes and 50 seconds, I think. Yeah, because in the pilot study we had like 10 or 11 minutes and they were like, this is way too long, I feel really sick. So I think reducing it helped. And then also with the ethics, we actually provided bags and saltine crackers, and we had like a chill out zone they could go. We explained that to them before we started. So I think I made an effort for it to be like really safe and explain it to them that they could stop at any time, there was no pressure.
But no one did.
But no one did.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I was thinking that there might be some limitations in this measurement type because it seems to work very well if you have a passive VR experience where your hands are free, but very often we want people to use their hands. So Do you have any thoughts about how to measure in these cases?
Yeah, so we were thinking like you could have something on your like thigh or on your upper arm. A pedal? Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then that you could just like look into your like proprioception when you're wearing the head-mounted display and just kind of, yeah. So like a smaller dial, because the dial we used was really big. So yeah, for future research, like reduce it and then put it somewhere on the body.
I'm curious a little bit about the visual feedback. One of your motivations was that this, in theory, doesn't break presence as much as taking them out and giving them a questionnaire. But you don't actually have a virtual dial or avatar hand, which might increase presence more. Have you considered that at all?
Yeah, that was like some participants. Yeah, we allowed participants to put the dial in a place that was easy for them to access. Because I was worried that they wouldn't be able to see it or locate it, but that wasn't actually a problem. Yeah, that's a good point.
Any more questions?
Thank you for the talk. It's probably like an add-on to the first question about like ethics and like the participants. So we also try to induce motion sickness, and we do sort of similar studies actually also with a roller coaster. And so we try that in our lab, and I get motion sick, and my lab members get like motion sick. But then once we start recruiting participants, they get way less or not motion sick. And I do wonder whether we have like for this kind of studies like a selection bias, because participants knowing that they get motion sick, they don't even sign up.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree people are like new to VR technology, and a lot of people don't know you can get sick from it. So I think most people were like quite new or had only used VR a couple of times, and they weren't really familiar with cybersickness. So it wasn't really, I feel like people weren't really self-selecting out of the experiment.
Okay, because like ethics in our case ask us in the participant information sheet to say that you can get motion sick.
Yeah, we had that in our consent form as well. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for the talk. Can you share a bit more background about choosing a dial as a form of input device compared to other? I presume you could have considered other types, such as a linear lever or joystick and other things. Can you share a bit more?
Yeah. So we trialed like a lever, but that was, the dial was just easier, and we thought it mapped better onto cybersickness. Like you're becoming more cybersickness, so you just have to turn it up. We thought that action was, fitted the mapping really well. And then we also thought about maybe like a sponge or something that you could grip, and like the tighter you would grip, the more cybersick you would get. But then we actually looked into cybersickness, and a lot of people they feel really tired, and so like getting people to grip more when they're more sick wasn't like a good mapping.
More questions?
Maybe just a discussion kind of question. I said we're about to run a study with people who are in pain, and we want to measure the amount of pain they feel, and I'm thinking of maybe using something like that as a dial. But on the other hand, I have concerns about the immersion part. So people may be so involved in the experience they just forget to do it. So you mentioned something that you prompted them every minute, that they have to rank.
Yeah, so in the FMS, the experimenter would verbally ask the participant to give a rating, but we decided to do a visual prompt that just kind of came up.
Right,
there,
okay.
if you can see.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what we used. Yeah.
Any other questions?
one more thought.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that I'm often a little bit concerned when it comes to sort of both questionnaires and other sort of self-reporting ways of getting information from people.
Yeah.
That maybe they're influenced by what they think they should do rather than what they actually feel.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
and that perhaps another approach to this problem would be to look at people's preferences. But the question is, how do you get to those? And I was thinking you could see what snack people would like after the experiment, but there are also problems with that.
Yeah.
And then how do you do it during? But one way would be, for instance, to allow users to control the speed of the experience. And but there are probably many other ways. I was just thinking, have you considered sort of like a not self-reporting based way of getting this information?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot as well, and like directly asking them as opposed to like objective measures. But then, so our research goal was to increase comfort in VR, and so does it really matter if they're feeling more cyber sickness because they think they should be? Like, they are feeling more sick, so I think directly asking them is okay when your goal is to increase comfort in VR, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. Did the participants ever miss the prompts, the visual prompts?
No, not really. Yeah.
I know I was going to ask about biometrics as well, but I guess you sort of covered that already. I was going to ask too, you talked a bit about sort of setting up the safe space and letting them know that there would be snacks and things. Do you think that had any additional priming effects?
I kind of explained it as like, this is only precautionary and because of ethics, but like just in case you really need, we do have this set up, but most people don't need to use it. So I was kind of trying to minimize. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Okay. All right, let's thank Natalie again.